I have always been fascinated by classical music. Since childhood, I have dreamed of becoming a great composer, capable of creating melodies that would touch people's souls. But I never imagined that my passion would lead me to such a dark, disturbing place. My name is Michael Blackwood. I'm 28 years old, and I'm a rising pianist. Or at least I was, until that fateful night at the Metropolitan Theater in New York City. It was during a charity concert that I received an invitation to perform at the legendary Lost Theater, a place I believed to be just an urban legend. The man who approached me after my performance was elegant, mysterious, with eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. He promised that playing in that theater would be the opportunity of a lifetime. Little did I know that this opportunity would become my worst nightmare. What followed was a terrifying journey that made me question my sanity, my reality, and even my own existence. This is my story, an account of the events that led me to the depths of terror and made me understand the true meaning of despair. It all began on a rainy October night. The taxi dropped me off in front of an imposing Victorian building, its Gothic towers reaching towards the stormy sky. The Lost Theater, as it was known, was located on the outskirts of New York, isolated and forgotten by most people. Its once majestic, ornate facade now showed clear signs of abandonment and decay. As I approached the entrance, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The carved oak doors creaked open, as if reluctantly welcoming me. The foyer was shrouded in gloom, lit only by a few flickering candles. The musty, decaying smell invaded my nostrils, mixed with a sweet, sickly aroma I couldn't identify. A hooded figure emerged from the shadows, making my heart leap. "Welcome, Maestro Blackwood," said a raspy, emotionless voice. "The stage awaits you." I followed the mysterious figure through the labyrinthine corridors of the theater, the floorboards groaning under our feet. The walls were covered with ancient portraits, and I had the unsettling feeling that the eyes in the paintings were watching me. Finally, we reached the main auditorium. The place was vast and imposing, with row upon row of faded red seats stretching into the darkness. In the center of the stage, bathed in a single beam of light, stood a magnificent grand piano. "Your instrument awaits," murmured my mysterious guide, disappearing into the shadows before I could ask any questions. Hesitantly, I climbed onto the stage and sat at the piano. The ivory keys were cold to the touch, as if they hadn't been played in decades. I took a deep breath and began to play a Beethoven sonata. The first notes echoed through the empty theater, reverberating in a strange way. As I played, I felt a subtle change in the air. The shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, and the sound of the piano began to distort in impossible ways. Suddenly, I heard applause. I stopped playing abruptly and looked at the audience. To my astonishment, I saw that the theater was now full. Hundreds of pale, ethereal figures occupied the seats, their vacant eyes fixed on me. My heart raced. I tried to get up but found that I couldn't move. My hands returned to the piano keys as if they had a will of their own. I began to play again. This time it was not Beethoven. It was a melody I had never heard before, dark and hypnotic. As I played, the figures in the audience began to contort and melt, their faces transforming into grotesque masks of agony. The entire theater seemed to pulse to the rhythm of the music, the walls dripping like melted wax. I tried to stop, but my fingers continued to move furiously across the keys. The melody became more intense, more frenzied. I felt as if I was being consumed by the music, my own consciousness merging with the tormented notes. It was then that I saw, reflected in the polished surface of the piano, a face that was not my own. It was the face of the man who had invited me to play here, but now his eyes were black pits of pure evil. "Keep playing, maestro," a voice whispered in my mind. "Symphony of Despair is only just beginning." Terrified, I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. My fingers continued to dance across the keys, producing a cacophony of sounds that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. The walls of the theater trembled, and the spectral figures in the audience contorted in a macabre dance. Suddenly, I felt something cold touch my shoulder. I looked to the side and saw a skeletal hand, the long, bony fingers grasping me. My entire body shuddered, and I felt as if my soul was being sucked out of my body. "You've been chosen, Michael," a voice whispered in my ear, as cold as the winter wind. "Your music will feed the theater for generations." Piano keys began to bleed, a viscous, dark liquid oozing between my fingers. The metallic smell invaded my nostrils, mingling with the sweet, putrid aroma that permeated the air. My vision began to blur, and I felt as if I was falling into a bottomless abyss. In a flash of lucidity, I forced my eyes to focus. That's when I noticed something strange in the corner of the stage. An ancient, ornately carved mirror. In the reflection, I saw not just myself, but hundreds of tormented faces trapped behind the glass, their mouths open in silent screams. The music reached a deafening crescendo and the mirror began to crack. The shattering roar, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. In the same instant, I felt as if something inside me had also broken. Everything fell silent. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the theater's foyer. The mysterious man who had invited me was there, smiling enigmatically. "Congratulations, Maestro Blackwood," he said, his voice now soft and melodious. "You have passed the test." Confused and disoriented, I stammered. "Test? What are you talking about?" The man laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. "The Lost Theater chooses its musicians carefully. Only those capable of playing the Symphony of Despair are worthy to join us." He made a sweeping gesture with his hand, and suddenly the dilapidated foyer transformed. The walls gained a golden luster, crystal chandeliers lit up, and the musty smell was replaced by the aroma of fresh roses. "Welcome to your new home, Michael," said, extending his hand. "Here, your music will live forever." I looked at my own hands and with horror realized they were transparent, almost ethereal. I had become part of the Lost Theater, another doomed spirit condemned to play for all eternity. In the days, weeks, or perhaps years that followed, for time had lost all meaning, I discovered the true history of the Lost Theater. Built in the late 19th century by an eccentric aristocrat obsessed with music and the occult, the place had been the stage for a terrible ritual. The aristocrat, in his quest for immortality and the perfect music, had sacrificed dozens of talented musicians, trapping their souls within the theater. Each new musician drawn to the place, like I had been, underwent the same test. Those who could play the Symphony of Despair, a composition created from the suffering of the imprisoned souls, were invited to join the eternal cast of the theater. I was now part of this accursed choir, condemned to play night after night for an audience of specters. My music, which had once brought joy and emotion, was now an instrument of eternal torment. The worst part of all was the awareness. I knew I was trapped, knew I was just another captive soul, but I could do nothing to change my situation. Every note I played was agony, every chord a reminder of what I had lost. Sometimes, in the brief moments between performances, I would wander the theater's corridors, observing the outside world. The fogged windows, I saw people passing by, living their lives, completely oblivious to the horror that existed just a few steps away. It was during one of these walks that I discovered the book. Hidden in a secret alcove behind the stage, it was an ancient tome, bound in black leather and engraved with strange symbols on the cover. The yellowed pages contained bizarre sheet music and texts in a language I didn't recognize. Intrigued and desperate for any chance of escape, I began to study the book whenever I could. Slowly, I started to decipher its content. It was a grimoire, a book of black magic that detailed the ritual used to create the Lost Theater. And more importantly, it contained instructions for breaking the curse. The ritual required a sacrifice, not of blood, but of music. One had to play a specific melody, counter-symphony that would nullify the power of the Symphony of Despair. But there was a terrible risk. If the melody was played incorrectly, the musician's soul would be destroyed, banished to an eternal void. For what seemed like months, I practiced in secret. I memorized every note, every pause, every nuance of the counter-symphony. And finally, on a night when the full moon hung over the theater like a watchful eye, I decided it was time. I stepped onto the stage, ignoring the curious stares of the other spirits. I sat at the piano and, with a deep sigh, began to play. The first notes echoed through the theater, and immediately I felt the change. The air grew thick, charged with electricity. The walls began to tremble, and I heard screams, not of agony, but of rage, coming from all around. I continued playing, my fingers flying across the keys. The melody was complex, full of dissonances and strange harmonies that defied musical logic. Each note was a battle against the forces that held the theater and all of us captive. As the music grew in intensity, I saw cracks opening in the walls, light penetrating through them. The spirits around me began to dissipate, some crying out in joy, others in terror. The mysterious man appeared before me, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "Stop," he yelled. "You don't know what you're doing." But I did. For the first time in a long while, I was certain of what I was doing. I struck the final chord with all the strength I could muster. There was a moment of absolute silence, as if the universe itself had held its breath. And then, with a deafening roar, the Lost Theater began to crumble. I felt my body, my true solid body, fall through the stage floor. It fell and fell through layers of reality until I opened my eyes. I was lying on the damp grass, in front of what remained of the lost theater. The once imposing building was now just ruins. Its towers collapsed and the walls reduced to rubble. I stood up, shaky, barely believing I had succeeded. I was free. We were all free. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Amidst the debris, glinting in the moonlight, was the book, the grimoire that had saved me. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. Its weight in my hands was both comforting and terrifying. As I walked away from the ruins of the lost theater, I couldn't help but think, music has power. Power to create, power to destroy. And now, that power was in my hands. I looked back one last time. For an instant, I thought I saw a shadowy figure among the ruins, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. But when I blinked, it had vanished. As I walked down the dark road towards the city lights, a question echoed in my mind. Has the nightmare truly ended? Or is it only just beginning?